Good day. It is a dark age. It is a bloody age. It is an age of corruption and demons. It is the 41st millennium, and there is only war. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Warhammer 40,000. For once it was a fairly obscure franchise, now it is taking the world by storm. And today, we're going to be taking a look at some of the best books in the Warhammer 40k franchise.
Warhammer 40,000 is quite remarkable because it did not start life as a TV show, book, or even a movie. Instead, it began life as a tabletop wargame, and that is still where most of the focus is placed. The tabletop wargame is something I've never participated in, but essentially what you do is you buy plastic crack and you fight other people's plastic crack. It has a lot of arcane rules, and these rules are updated periodically. It was super successful in that niche and was able to slowly grow a fan base, until eventually novels were published to flesh out the lore. Funny enough, the novels were not really taken that seriously by the hardcore tabletop gamers, and it was just referred to as fluff. Over the last 2 decades, the novels began to be seen as a serious aspect of Warhammer 40k, and the concept of lore began to be seen as important as the arcane rules of the game itself. Warhammer 40,000 started life as a tabletop wargaming setting, and it featured numerous factions that you could buy plastic crack of and fight. Over the lifespan of the game, each faction has received an extensive backstory, numerous memorable characters, and a great narrative. Lore was first found in what are called codexes, books of rules used by the tabletop nerds to fight their plastic crack, and for a time that's all the story there was. But eventually Games Workshop, the creator and IP holder of 40k, founded their own publishing house called The Black Library. This publishing house hired some talented writers to take 40k from a crack fest and turn it into a series with an actual narrative. Since the late 90s, there have been hundreds of 40k books produced, each of varying quality. For a series that has never had a TV show or movie based upon it, it is quite remarkable that the universe is as fleshed out as it is, and it can be said that Warhammer 40,000 is a contemporary to the Star Wars expanded universe, along with Star Trek as well. With that in mind though, there is no single plotline for Warhammer 40,000. As described in my intro, it is an age of war and death, where humanity is fighting an all-out struggle against hostile aliens, Cthulhu monsters, and cultists, and itself! The series can best be compared to the DC or Marvel universe. It's a setting, not a story, with numerous characters each having their own mutually exclusive adventures. And also somewhat similar to DC and Marvel, Warhammer 40k will have a number of retcons here and there. With that in mind though, books from the late 90s and early 2000s are still within continuity, but some of the details might be a bit different in current continuity. It is often said that in 40k everything is canon, but that's been debunked a number of times. The fact is, 40k has sort of a sliding canon concept, where a term or an action in an earlier book might be invalidated or explained differently in another book. But mostly all of these books will be within the same continuity, and only a few novels have been exiled from continuity or retconned entirely. Most of the factions in 40k have been maintained over the years, but some have had a little bit of adjustment here and there, either making them more dark or light depending upon the writer's preference. The setting itself is often described by meme media as grimdark, but is it grimdark? Grimdark will have different meanings to different people, but to me personally, the term describes a setting where everyone is evil, and if you're not super evil, you get killed by someone who is super evil. And nothing good ever happens ever, and everything is pain and nothing but pain, man. 40k is a far more versatile franchise than this. Now don't get me wrong, Warhammer 40k is a dark universe, far darker than even the Legacy era in Star Wars, but it's not full grimdark. There are heroic characters to be found, and the series knows it's dark, and many of the best characters do their best to make the most of a difficult situation. And in many novels, the heroes do win, and there are good guys to be found, and they try to do the right thing, and are sometimes not even punished for it. The memes will tell you that this series is grimdark, but like reality, it's just a darker shade of gray. Or, as I used to tell people in the early 2000s, it's Star Wars on heroin. This is not an easy universe to understand. There's not just a 40k movie that explains everything. In fact, there's not really a good visual jumping off point at all. There was a movie called Ultramarines, but it was god-awful. The best way to get into the 40K setting and lore is to read the books. And today, I'm going to be talking about the essential 40K novels. With 40K, nothing's easy. You can't just buy these books as singles, because guess what? They go out of print. But Black Library will reprint old books in what are called omnibuses. These omnibuses collect 3 or more novels and short stories into one affordable package. And you better believe I bought a whole bunch of those bastards as an early 20-something. The downside is that you can't find singles for a reasonable price, and so my novel recommendations are omnibus recommendations. Thankfully, you won't break the bank on these, so if you hate them, you're not out too much monies. So there are 3 essential 40K omnibuses that will give you all the lore knowledge you could ever want and some kick-ass stories to boot. So what you got are the Space Wolf Omnibus, the second Caiaphas Cain Omnibus, and last but most assuredly not least, the Eisenhorn Omnibus. Space Wolf Omnibus 1 collects the novels Space Wolf, Ragnar's Claw, and Grey Hunter, and they were written by legendary Warhammer 40K novelist William King, and they were published from 1999 to 2001. The first novel, Space Wolf, is the single greatest jumping off point in the entire Black Library. The novel begins by introducing us to Viking warrior Ragnar Thunderfist. He lives upon the ice planet of Fenris and fights against his people's ancestral enemy, the Grim Skulls. In the tribal battle, members of the technologically advanced Space Wolves observe the battle and deem Ragnar worthy to join their ranks. This novel lets you learn all the lore of the 41st millennium as Ragnar does. He is nothing but a Viking warrior living with medieval tech, and as the novel progresses, he slowly learns about the universe he is living in. How in the first part of the novel, he thinks a gun is a magical talisman. If you know nothing like young Ragnar, by the end of Space Wolf, you'll have a good working knowledge of the universe, all without the novel throwing innumerable terms without context at you. The rest of the trilogy shows him rising in the ranks of the Space Wolves. Now, what's a Space Wolf? Well, read the book! But seriously, the Space Wolves are a faction of super soldiers called Space Marines, genetically augmented warriors that fight hostile aliens and cultists, etc., etc. They're really bad hombres. The Space Wolves are Norse influenced and are the most laid back of all the Space Marine factions, and the most human as well. Ragnar is an excellent protagonist. He is not a Gary Stu, but nor is he a boring military dude either. He is a moral and steadfast character that questions what he is told and thinks outside the box, and can best be compared to Luke Skywalker, if Luke Skywalker was 8 foot tall and had giant fangs. This is not just a shoot 'em up book either. Ragnar reflects upon what he's doing and the morality of being an 8 foot tall super soldier. He cares about his men and will protect the innocent, and you better believe he is gonna shove a spear up the ass of the guilty. William King was the premier storyteller at Games Workshop and can be considered a Timothy Zahn equivalent, and the whole of Black Library has long since suffered from his absence, as he left them sometime in the early 2000s, and many of his ongoing series were completed by other writers that, in all fairness, did a good job in their own right. If you love the Space Wolf novels, you will love the rest of 40K. This was a novel series that got my grandfather into 40K. He was pretty dubious about the whole 40K concept at first, but he gave it a chance, and I'll never forget him asking me if there was a TV show based upon it. And thankfully, there never has, and hopefully never will be. Moving right along, the second omnibus you should check out is Cain Omnibus 2. Who's Caiaphas Cain? Well, Caiaphas Cain is the 40K equivalent to Han the Man Solo. The main human faction in the 40K universe is called the Imperium of Man. It can best be compared to Europe in the Middle Ages, kind of. The IOM is an empire of millions of worlds, and each world is more or less independent, but they are unified in the veneration of the God Emperor of Mankind. So long as you worship the Impy and pay your taxes, you can do pretty much whatever you want. Don't do those two things, and you will get stomped. While the Space Marines are the heavy hitters of the setting, there are other military forces in the Imperium of Man, and the poor bloody infantry is called the Imperial Guard. They do most of the fighting and most of the dying. They have political officers that ensure compliance. Some can be good, and others can be as evil as the people they fight. Caiaphas Cain is a pure hero through and through. He cares for his men and is a shrewd politician and tactician, and along with all that, he can bullseye a fly at 100 meters with his pistol, and then cut up a bastard with his chainsword all at the same time. The novels are written from the first-person perspective and take the form of a memoir that Cain is writing after he has retired. In the memoir, Cain says that he is a coward, but this is just him having survivor's guilt, because when you read the novels, you can read between the lines and see that Cain feels guilty for living where all his friends and allies have died over the years. It's pretty deep stuff. Cain also has a sidekick named Jurgen. He is a stolid if unimaginative companion, but he pulls his boss's ass out the fire at least once per book. The books also draw attention to Jurgen's unique odor. In short, he smells like the average 40k fan, like the average Fortnite fan. The novel series is still ongoing and is written by legendary writer Sandy Mitchell, and it spans 11 bloody novels so far, and numerous short stories and even audio dramas. Gotta love the Brits. But the one omnibus I recommend the most is Caiaphas Cain, Defender of the Imperium, which collects the following novels: Death or Glory, Duty Calls, and Cain's Last Stand. The novels were published from 2006 to 2008 and form the informal Perilla trilogy. In short, each novel will take place either entirely or a little bit on the planet Perilla and has Cain dealing with enemies both obvious and not. The first novel, Death or Glory, is by far the best Cain novel in the entire series, and possibly the best novel in the entire Warhammer 40k franchise, although there's a lot of contenders for that slot, and I gotta say Death or Glory is definitely in the top 10. Cain is headed to the planet Perilla to fight an evil alien force called the Orcs, aka giant green rage monsters. He gets shot down over enemy lines and proceeds to form a kick-ass army to fight the Orcs, and is a novel that shows Cain at his very best. This is also one of the best military science fiction novels I've ever read, mainly because it has actual human characters in it instead of cardboard cutouts. The next novel is alright. It has Cain more in a supportive role and features his space girlfriend named Amberly Vale. It's kind of forgettable, especially when you compare it to the next novel, Cain's Last Stand. Cain has retired on Perilla and has to take charge when Space Cthulhu cultists invade. If this were the last book in the Cain series, this would be a great send-off as he does battle with Space Bitler. The rest of the Caiaphas Cain novel series is pretty good, if a bit repetitive in places. He often goes into a cave or a tunnel, and when he's down there, he kicks the crap out of some kind of creepy crawly bastard. Cain has long since become my second favorite fictional character of all time, second only to Han the Man Solo himself. Next, we got the Big Mama. We got the trilogy to end all 40k novel trilogies. We got the Eisenhorn Omnibus! This omnibus features the novels Xenos, Hereticus, and Malleus. They were published from 2001 to 2002 and were written by 40k legend Dan I Can't Get a Series in Under 100 Books, Abnett. This novel series introduces the Inquisitor faction of the Imperium of Man. Basically, think of the Spectres from Mass Effect, but with way more power. The novel is written from the first-person perspective of Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn. This novel is very much a classical space adventure. Eisenhorn gathers a crew of badasses to stop a villain. Gregor is an excellent protagonist. He is not a vicious killer, but instead is a pragmatic investigator, and he is actually quite caring to his companions, and has great depth, and you see him go from fresh-faced newbie to old and bitter veteran over the course of the trilogy, and he can be roughly compared to Commander Shepard from Mass Effect. This is a fairly loose trilogy, as there is only really one plot thread tying the books together. Book 1 serves as a great intro to the Inquisition and shows that they're not all evil, and it's like Mass Effect, only way darker. But Gregor Boy is not a renegade and is pretty much a paragon throughout all of Book 1. Book 2 is a bit darker and has Gregor fighting an evil Inquisitor. And Book 3, oh boy, it's the darkest of the lot, and Gregor racks up a metric shit ton of renegade points. If there was going to be a 40k movie trilogy, it should be based upon this, because each novel is extraordinarily cinematic, and it more than earns its reputation as one of the best, if not the best trilogy in all of Warhammer 40k. And so those are my top 3 Warhammer 40k omnibuses. After you finish with those, you will have banished the darkness of ignorance with the light of the immortal God Emperor of mankind. Unlike with Star Wars, 40K is a universe with no beginning and no end. So if you're a cool dude, there are many more 40K books to read. So let's get stacking! If you enjoyed the first Space Wolf Omnibus, then it's on to the second. In the second Space Wolf Omnibus, you've got Wolfblade, Sons of Fenris, and Wolf's Honor, which were published from 2002 through 4. The first novel, Wolfblade, was written by William King, and the last two were written by Lee Lightner. The Lightner novels are of the same quality as the King ones, and this omnibus shows Ragnar's continued growth as a Space Wolf and shows what Earth is like in the 41st millennium, and the entire Space Wolf series ends with a bang. Now, in the latter years of the 2010s, a number of old series were brought back, and so in 2015, a novella named Ragnar Blackmane was written by Aaron Dibsky Bowden, and it takes place after the end of the novel Wolf's Honor and deals with its aftermath. Ragnar's story is one of the many highlights of the 40K franchise and shows that Space Marines can have great characterization if done right. But who cares about the glory, boys? It's time for the poor bloody infantry. The Gaunt Ghost series was written by Dan I Get Paid by the Letter Abnett and published from 1999 to 2021 and consists of 15 bloody novels. Even I can't read that many. This novel series features the adventures of Colonel Commissar Ibram Gaunt. You can probably guess what he looks like, and his regiment, the 10th First and Only. For 15 goddamn novels, they fight in the Sabbat Worlds campaign, and they do battle with the highly organized Space Cthulhu cultists known as the Blood Pack. The novels have a shit ton of characters and characterization, and are great for about 5 books. And then it starts to get really bloody repetitive. There's too many characters, and they really get hard to keep track of at times. And Gaunt just isn't nearly as entertaining as Caiaphas Cain, and the whole series just feels a bit dull. Next, you got the Grey Knights Omnibus. This was a gateway book for a friend of mine that didn't go in for all this heroic crap. They wanted some cosmic horror, and the Grey Knights Omnibus delivers. When the Imperial Guard are getting turned into gibbering masses of jelly, when the Space Marines are dying in droves, when Cthulhu comes a-callin', you call in the Grey Knights. They are Space Marines that are trained and equipped to fight literal demons from what is all intents and purposes hell. The Grey Knights Omnibus collects the novels Grey Knights, Dark Adeptus, and finally Hammer of Demons. They were written by Ben Counter and published from 2004 through 8. The trilogy follows the demon-slaying adventures of a newly promoted Grey Knight named Ulrich. He and his team of Super Saiyan badasses have adventures that would leave even the likes of Kane and Eisenhorn a red smear on the ground. Book 1 has Ulrich and team track down a Cthulhu monster before he can manifest. Book 2 has them going up against a demon-possessed giant robot. Yes, you heard that right. The last novel has Ulrich stripped of all his weapons and is forced to escape the Cthulhu monsters. In a manner somewhat similar to the saga of the Doomslayer, these novels are far darker than the others I've mentioned and are much more horror-focused. Ulrich is a great protagonist as he cares for his men and is not a killer zealot. Instead, he has the capacity to think and feel actual emotions, and he knows and appreciates the sacrifices of being a Grey Knight. Next, we got the Ultramarines, aka the Ultra Smurfs. They are an overplayed Space Marine faction that are the poster boys of the franchise. Amongst 40K fans, the name Matt Ward brings forth inarticulate rage, because Matt Ward was a writer for 40K's codexes, and basically he turned the Ultramarines into basically the cornerstone of the entire franchise, and said that all the other Space Marine factions looked upon the Ultramarines as some kind of spiritual liege, and spiritual liege basically became a big meme amongst the 40K community. Now, the Ultramarines aren't all bad. They are based upon the Roman Empire, and they can be really boring, but when they're written by Graham McNeil, we finally get some real characterization. In the Ultramarines Omnibus, we got 2 badasses, Uriel Ventress and Pausanias, and they do battle with evil foes of the Imperium. The first of the Ultramarines Omnibuses is by far the best and features Nightbringer, Warriors of Ultramar, and Dead Sky, Black Sun. These were published from 2002 through 4. The first 2 novels are pretty kick-ass and have Uriel making some hard choices when fighting against impossible odds. See, the Ultras are a pretty hidebound bunch of Space Marines, and they are supposed supposed to follow the rules, but Uriel does what needs doing and says screw him. This gets him and Pausanias booted from the Ultramarines and sent literally to hell in the novel Dead Sky Black Sun. This is one of the best Space Marine novels in the entire franchise. V and you end up on a hell world known as Midrengard and have to face down the evil warlord Hansu and put a stop to his fiendish plans. The novel really tests Uriel's humanity and leadership ability and really shows how good 40k can get. Back to the poor bloody infantry, we've got the Gunheads. Gottfried's Gunheads was written by Steve Parker and published in 2009. This is a novel where some Imperial Guard tankers have to fight some giant green rage monsters and recapture a special tank to fight in another much larger war. We got some cool tank battles, a neat mystery, and more cool characters. And speaking of some cool characters, we got another omnibus, The Last Chancers, written by Gav Thorpe, and this omnibus features the novels 13th Legion, Kill Team, and Annihilation Squad. It's essentially the Dirty Dozen, or for those of you who weren't born until the last 10 years, the Suicide Squad. Thankfully, Harley Quinn does not exist in the 40k universe, and if she did, she wouldn't be lasting for very long, that's for sure. Anyway, the novel is told from the first-person perspective of one of the Last Chancers, a guy named Cage. Rage Cage is kind of a bastard, but still has the remnants of a heart. He is part of a penal legion that is sent to fight in the harshest of environments. And this penal legion is led by one Colonel Schaefer. Yes, that's a reference to Predator. These novels are more grimdark than the novels I've mentioned previously, and are more in keeping with the memes that talk about 40k. Cage is no hero, and in one novel he even strangles an innocent to death so that the squad's cover is not blown. If you want to go dark, this is it. We got Caddy in Blood, written by Aaron Dibsky Bowden and published in 2009, and this features an Imperial Guard regiment from the planet Cadia, aka the really bad, non-genetically engineered hombres, and they're going up against the forces of Space Cthulhu and zombies. It deconstructs a bit of the setting, but maintains a heroic tone throughout. A great shoot-'em-up book all around. For the longest time, 40k pretty much just stayed the same. All these books that I mentioned had a lot of monumental events happen within them, but they didn't really change the universe that much, if at all. Well, around the mid-2010s, Games Workshop decided to shake a few things up, started bringing back a few dead characters, and it advanced the setting. Ostensibly to sell more plastic crack, as they came up with Super Space Marines called Primaris Space Marines. But whatever, we got a good book out of it called Lion, Son of the Forest, written by Mike Brooks and published in 2023. Lion, Son of the Forest returns the character Lion L. Johnson to the setting. Who was he? He was one of the Emperor's genetically augmented generals that served him 10,000 years before 40k, and he's been missing all that time, and now it's time for his kick-ass return. In the novel, he has to deal with some of his past deeds, and the fact that he is now 10,000 years older. It's got some great character moments, and shows that 40k is not stopping anytime soon. Alas, I'm gonna have to stop, because I could go on all day about Warhammer 40k. Because in addition to Warhammer 40k proper, you've got what's called the Horus Heresy, which is a prequel to Warhammer 40k, and then you've got two other sub-series of Warhammer 40k called Warhammer Crime and Warhammer Horror. Warhammer Crime focuses on police procedural stuff in the 40k universe, and Warhammer Horror has more, well, horror-based stories within 40k. And Warhammer 40k is already kind of horror-based anyway, but this is more so. If you want pitch dark stuff, take a look at Warhammer Horror. With all that said, Warhammer 40k is a kick-ass novel series. If you've never heard of it, or you were intimidated by getting into it, just read Space Wolf and enter a larger, more scary world. And so, I am General Lotz, wishing you good Dead Sky, Black Sun, and good Death or Glory, or whatever makes you happy. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and please consider leaving a like or a comment, as the algorithm desires your soul. And I want to thank all those fans who have supported this channel, both past and present.